I knew something was wrong the moment the porch light blinked twice and went dark. It wasn't the kind of welcome home I was expecting after 3 weeks abroad, dragging 2 suitcases, a bag of duty-free coffee beans, and jet lag that felt like a cinder block pressing on my skull. The key in my hand, the same one I'd used for the past 6 years, wouldn't even slide into the lock. Not jammed, replaced. The handle was shinier, new. I stared at it for a few seconds, more confused than angry. My first thought wasn't that someone had changed the lock. It was that I'd walked up to the wrong door. But no, the potted cactus by the steps was still there, with the goofy googly eyes my niece stuck on before I left. This was definitely my house. It just didn't want me anymore. I tried the back gate. Locked. I punched in the garage code. Denied. I circled the house twice before realizing my poor golden retriever, Kona, wasn't barking through the window. He barked at squirrels, butterflies, clouds. Silence from him meant he wasn't inside. That's when the worry really started to creep in. Something had happened here while I was gone, and I wasn't just locked out, I was being kept out. I fumbled for my phone and called my neighbor, Mike, a retired electrician who always had his ears to the ground and his lawn chairs too close to the property line. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey Jason, back already?" he said cautiously. "Yeah. And I can't get into my house. The locks are changed and I can't reach Kona. What the hell happened while I was gone?" There was a pause, followed by a sigh. "You better come over. I got something to show you." I left my suitcases on the porch, not that I had anywhere else to put them, and trudged over to Mike's place. He was already standing outside with a tablet in his hand. "Watch this," he said, and pulled up a video from his security camera. It was dated 6 days ago. On screen, a white van pulled up in front of my house, and out hopped Karen Whitmore, our HOA president and certified neighborhood tyrant, along with a locksmith. They strolled up to my front door like it was her summer cottage, and in broad daylight, changed every lock on the place. How is this even legal?" I blurted. She said the house was abandoned. Claimed she'd sent letters, emails, even a certified notice. Told everyone it was an emergency HOA procedure under clause 6-point-something of the agreement. Something about prolonged vacancy and code violations. "I was gone for 3 weeks, I said. "It's not a crime to travel." Mike rubbed the back of his neck. "I tried to tell her. But she said you hadn't responded to any notices, and that gave her authority." I stared at the footage again. Karen, wearing her pink windbreaker with HOA stitched on the sleeve, gave the camera a little wave as she stepped back from the door. Then something caught my eye. A flash of movement inside. A person. "Who is that?" "Her nephew, I think. She's been living there. Holding yoga classes in your living room. Saw a dog there yesterday, but didn't look like Kona." My stomach dropped. "She brought a dog into my house?" He hesitated. "Jason, I think she gave your dog away." That was it. Whatever calm I had left was obliterated. I stormed across the street and banged on my own front door. The door opened slightly, on a chain lock, and Karen's face peeked through the gap with the expression of someone entirely too pleased with themselves. "Jason, what a surprise," she said with fake cheer. "I assumed you weren't coming back. You changed the locks on my house, moved in, and gave away my dog." She clicked her tongue. "Now let's not be dramatic. Your house was abandoned. It violated multiple HOA bylaws. Section 3.2 on absentee ownership. I own this house. There's no absentee clause that lets you just move in. I sent you notices. I was in Germany on business. I didn't even know you were. Wait. How did you know I was out of town?" Karen smiled with her teeth, but not her eyes. "Well, that's not the point. The point is, I had to secure the home. There were concerns about property degradation." I was about to explode, but I held it together just enough to call the police. 2 patrol cars arrived within the hour. I explained everything. They checked her documentation. It was all stamped with some HOA seal that looked official but screamed PowerPoint template. One of the officers finally shrugged. Sir, this appears to be a civil dispute. You'll need to go through the courts. So you're saying she can just steal my house, and I have to file paperwork to get it back? The officer didn't answer. Karen, still smiling, closed the door in my face. Fuming, I checked into the nearest motel, sat on the scratchy bedspread, and fired up my laptop. Luckily, I had installed a cloud-based security camera system last year after a break-in scare. I logged in, and what I saw nearly made me throw the laptop across the room. There she was, Karen in her tacky yoga pants, leading a class of 5 women through sun salutations right where my grandmother's piano used to be. A teenager skateboarded down my hallway, knocking a vase off a side table and laughing. And worst of all, someone was posting my vintage record collection on a local selling app under the name HOA__Queen. I began recording everything. I called my lawyer. I messaged the shelter and tracked down Kona. Thankfully, he'd been microchipped and was now safe at a foster home. But the mystery didn't end there. The next morning, I noticed something odd when I returned to grab mail Karen had been kind enough to collect in a plastic bag left on my porch. I held my phone up to the smart meter and ran a diagnostic. The electricity usage had spiked to 3 times its normal level. Even though my thermostat was off, lights were off, and appliances weren't in use. My garage workshop, the one place with sensitive tech, had been accessed multiple times. Mike later told me that Karen had electricians install new power lines running from my breaker panel straight to the newly constructed security booth she had erected beside the HOA office. She had literally rerouted my home's power to run her HOA surveillance bunker. That was the moment everything snapped into focus. This wasn't just about a house. This was about control. She hadn't changed the locks because she feared abandonment. She changed them because she wanted what I had, and the HOA bylaws were just her excuse to take it. But if she thought I was going to roll over and accept it, then she'd clearly never seen what happened when someone pushed a calm man to war. Karen had taken my home, my dog, and now even my power. But she forgot one crucial thing. I built that house, brick by brick, and if she thought she could fence me out of my own life, she was going to learn what happens when a bulldozer meets bad intentions. The morning after discovering that Karen had rerouted electricity from my home to her security booth, I stood in the motel parking lot staring at my laptop, shaking my head in disbelief. I had pulled the energy logs from my smart meter, and what they revealed was absurd. Over the past 5 days, my house had pulled enough electricity to power a small diner. The worst part? The biggest draw wasn't the lights, HVAC, or even Karen's incessant smoothie blender. It was an industrial-grade surveillance rig plugged in from my garage wall, something I definitely hadn't installed. The feed even included a flickering HOA Command Center logo on the camera angle. Karen had turned my home into the HOA's new security nerve center. I was paying the utility bill for the same people locking me out. I marched back to the neighborhood and found Mike sitting in his usual folding chair, reading the paper like it was any other day and not the middle of an HOA coup. "You're not gonna believe this," I muttered, slapping the printout into his lap. He peered over his reading glasses and gave a low whistle. "Looks like they're hosting a space launch in your garage. They're draining my house to power their surveillance. There's a whole server rack in there now, and it's on my bill." Mike whistled again. "You know she had that booth built in 3 days? Said it was an emergency upgrade. She got some local contractor to rush it for triple pay. Didn't even get a permit. Said it was approved under the HOA Charter Emergency Infrastructure Addendum. Which, between you and me, is just a post-it note she taped to the back of the handbook." I stood there, gripping the edge of his porch rail, and finally asked the question that had been burning since I arrived. "Why does she hate me so much?" Mike set his paper down, real serious now. "She doesn't hate you. She fears you. You're the only one on this block who ever told her no to her face." It clicked. The time I rejected her koi pond proposal. the time I stopped her from charging the neighborhood for a marble gazebo, and most recently, when I refused to allow her to install a permanent HOA drone tower on my roof. Karen didn't want cooperation, she wanted obedience. I spent the next day at City Hall, buried in zoning codes and permit applications. Every fence, shed, and structure in our subdivision needed explicit approval. Karen's so-called HOA command center had none. And that meant I had leverage. I filled out a violation report and filed an official complaint. I also hired a private investigator, not to spy on Karen, but to comb through the HOA's financial records. I had a gut feeling there were more skeletons in her filing cabinet than just her crooked bylaws. Back at the motel, I monitored the camera feed again. Karen was in my kitchen, pouring wine like she was hosting a dinner party. A realtor stood next to her. Yes, an actual licensed realtor, who was walking through with a couple, pointing at cabinets and nodding. My cabinets, my quartz countertops, my backsplash that I spent 2 weekends installing by hand. I texted Mike, furious. He responded with a single photo. It was a screenshot of the neighborhood Facebook group. Karen had posted a listing titled Community Demonstration House, available for viewings. She wrote, a sample of the elegant lifestyle HOA leadership can help maintain. Currently under community use for demonstration and inspiration purposes. Not for sale yet. I stormed to the HOA office the next morning. The building sat half a block from my house and looked like a glorified tool shed. But Karen had recently given it a facelift, complete with stucco siding and a fountain that gurgled in the shape of an eagle holding a gavel. I knocked hard. Inside, she sat at a desk that looked like it was stolen from a courthouse, sipping coffee with her feet up and a framed portrait of herself hanging behind her. I'm filing a complaint with the city, I snapped. You've wired your command center to my power supply, and I've got proof. She didn't flinch. Jason, your behavior is becoming disruptive. If you keep interfering with HOA operations, we may have to initiate formal removal proceedings. I blinked. From my house. From the community, she said calmly. It's within our power to recommend revocation of residency privileges if an owner violates decorum repeatedly. You changed the locks on my house. Community safeguarding. You were unreachable, and we had every reason to suspect neglect. You gave away my dog. Rehomed him. You're welcome, honestly. At that point, I started laughing, not because it was funny but because nothing made sense anymore. Karen truly believed she was the neighborhood's queen, and she had written herself a crown using copy-pasted legalese and unchecked authority. On the way out, I noticed something strange. A metal utility conduit had been recently installed along the ground, running from the back of the office and disappearing into the dirt near my property line. I followed it. About 20 feet down, it resurfaced near my outdoor power junction, my private utility post. Karen hadn't just used my power. She'd hardwired the HOA's office into my house's feed, bypassing the grid entirely. No meter. No city approval. Just a buried line snaking across property lines like a parasite. That was my smoking gun. The next day, I brought in Leilachin, my lawyer, and an absolute bulldog in court. She reviewed everything, from my footage to my utility records to the zoning complaint I'd filed. She's toast, Lila said flatly. We'll file for an emergency injunction to reclaim the property. But that buried power line? That's a felony-level code violation if we can get the city inspector to confirm it. We brought in the inspector that same afternoon. His name was Kurt, and he showed up in a city-issued vest, rolling a power detection rig like a lawn mower. She didn't even bother to encase the wire properly, he muttered. That thing's running full voltage without any proper conduit. This could have started a fire. He filed the citation on the spot. That meant city fines, mandatory removal, and, most importantly, grounds for immediate enforcement action. Karen was about to have a very bad week. That evening, I went to a local hardware store and rented a power generator, just in case. My goal wasn't revenge. Not yet. But I wanted to make sure that when her precious HOA office went dark, I'd still be able to light up my camera feed and record her meltdown in high definition. What I didn't expect, however, was what happened just past midnight. I was watching the feed, sipping stale motel coffee, when I saw her creeping around my driveway with a flashlight. She crouched near the utility box, fumbling with something. The camera's night vision showed her using bolt cutters. Then, zap! A small spark lit up the side of the box, and Karen stumbled back, holding her hand. She wasn't disabling the feed. She was trying to cut the inspection tag off the wire. I called the police again. This time they came faster. Karen was still limping when they arrived, and the look on her face when the officers asked her if she had a permit to perform electrical work on another person's property was priceless. They didn't arrest her, but they did issue a warning and take down her information. Still, even that didn't stop her. The next morning, I woke to another unbelievable development. Karen had erected a new structure, a fence, an 8-foot-tall white monstrosity surrounding my entire lot, complete with a swinging iron gate that had a keypad on it. She called it a perimeter barrier for community cohesion. I stood at the curb, staring at the fortress she had wrapped around my life like a tomb. Mike strolled over, hands in his pockets, and said, "She's going nuclear." "No," I replied, my voice flat and determined. "She wants war." I stepped away, already dialing the number of someone who owed me a favor. I wasn't going to wait for court anymore. If Karen thought that fence was going to stop me, she was about to learn the hard way that I had something stronger than bylaws and bullhorns. I had a bulldozer. There's something fundamentally surreal about ordering a bulldozer like it's a pizza. One phone call, a few details, and the guy on the other end says, "We'll drop it at 5 a.m. You want a Komatsu or Caterpillar?" I picked Caterpillar. It felt appropriate, like poetic justice delivered with a claw. The man I called owed me a favor. His name was Darnell Dozer Brooks, a former combat engineer I met volunteering at a veterans' home repair program. Dozer now ran a demolition business and once knocked down a 2-story meth lab with a grin on his face and a burrito in one hand. When I explained the situation, he didn't even pause. "Your HOA built a fence on your property with no permit and wired themselves into your power grid?" he asked. "Yep. And you want to tear it all down legally?" City inspector signed off. "We've got the footage. We've got zoning violations. The works." Dozer let out a chuckle. "Oh, I'm gonna sleep like a baby tonight." The night before the operation, I couldn't sleep. Not from nerves. No, those had calcified into something else, but from anticipation. I sat in the motel room with my laptop open, watching Karen on the security feed as she added finishing touches to her monstrosity. She had added solar lights to the top of the fence posts, which blinked blue and white like some sad theme park perimeter. She even installed a sign, "Private, HOA demonstration property." What really burned was the smugness. The entitlement. It dripped from every detail, the imported tile path leading to my porch, the security camera she bolted into my soffit, the tiki torches arranged by my grill. She had erased every trace of me. Except one. In the corner of the garage feed, through all the wires and panels, hung an old army plaque. My father's, still bolted above the workbench. She hadn't touched it. Maybe she didn't notice it, or maybe even she had the decency to leave it alone. Either way, it reminded me that this wasn't just about property. It was about legacy. And it was about to be defended. At 5:02 a.m., Dozer pulled up with a trailer, his son Troy in the passenger seat holding a thermos the size of a cannon shell. The Caterpillar looked beautiful in the rising sun. Yellow. Powerful. Righteous. We unloaded at the corner of the cul-de-sac, while a few early joggers slowed down to gawk. One lady tripped over her dog leash and nearly fell when she saw me climb onto the machine like I was mounting a throne. "Jason," Dozer called over the rumble of the engine. "You sure you want to drive this yourself?" I grinned. I've waited too long not to. By the time I rolled up to my property line, a few neighbors were out with lawn chairs and phones. Mike had brought a thermos of his own and sat at the curb like he was watching a 4th of July parade. Karen, of course, came flying out of the HOA office in a silk robe and slippers, hair in foam curlers. She looked like a suburban Medusa. "What do you think you're doing?" "Removing an unpermitted structure," I called out. "City Ordinance 14.7c. You built this fence illegally. I have a signed demolition waiver and an inspector's order. That fence is HOA property. Built on mine. With my stolen power. Using HOA funds approved in violation of Charter Protocol. So yeah, this is happening." Her eyes narrowed. "You'll regret this." I fired up the blade and rolled forward. The first crack of wood shattering was sweeter than any song I'd ever heard. Boards split, solar lights toppled like plastic soldiers, and the keypad gate twisted sideways with a pitiful screech. I pushed forward, chewing through paneling like it was wet cardboard. Neighbors started clapping. One kid held up a sign that said, "Freedom," written in Sharpie on a pizza box. Karen screamed something unintelligible, then stormed back into the HOA office, and came out moments later with a megaphone. "This is harassment. Destruction of community assets. I'm calling the sheriff." "Please do," I yelled back. He signed the permit himself. By the time I reached the garage side of the house, Dozer stepped in with a backhoe to help yank out the section Karen had cemented into the ground. Every stomp of the machine was therapy. Every splintered fence post was justice. And when we reached the back where her trench cable ran underground, we didn't just cut it. We coiled it up and hand-delivered it to the city inspector's office in a plastic tote labeled "Illegal HOA Wiring Evidence." Karen disappeared mid-morning. Probably retreated into whatever lair spawned her to draft legal threat. I stayed to help clean up. Neighbors offered water, donuts, even helped drag broken posts into piles. For the first time since I'd returned from overseas, I actually felt welcome on my own block. It wasn't just about defeating Karen. It was about reclaiming everything she'd stolen, my reputation, my space, my control. And as we swept the last of the debris, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the inside of one of the fence posts, scratched in pen, were the words, "Help me." I blinked. I called Mike over. He looked at it, frowned, and said, "That looks like Claire's handwriting." Karen's assistant. Claire was a soft-spoken woman who joined the HOA board 2 months ago and then vanished from public view. Karen said she resigned for mental health. But if Claire wrote this, maybe she didn't leave willingly. I followed the lead. Over the next few hours, I reached out to a few neighbors who'd interacted with Claire. One told me she saw Claire crying in her car outside the HOA office. Another said she overheard Karen screaming at her during a budget meeting. Someone else claimed Claire once confided that she was trapped under a monster. I went home, finally, actually in my home again, and opened the drawer where I'd kept my spare garage keys. Empty. But in the corner was a sticky note that read, "Check attic." She doesn't know. Chills went down my spine. I grabbed a flashlight and climbed up. Dust, old boxes, insulation, and then something odd. A small black lockbox wedged behind the ductwork. Inside were a USB drive, a printed binder labeled HOA Finances 2023 Revised, and a stack of photos. Photos of Karen. In one, she was posing with a contractor and handing him a check, dated a week before the board-approved vote. In another, she was caught standing inside a neighbor's house without them present. The documents showed budget discrepancies, forged signatures, and enough damning evidence to collapse her entire regime. Claire hadn't run. She'd gone rogue from within. She'd planted the evidence in case something happened to her. And now, by pure dumb luck and persistence, I had found it. I wasn't just going to get my life back. I was going to burn Karen's empire to the ground. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even try. I sat at the kitchen island with the USB drive plugged into my laptop, the binder opened in front of me, and a list of names scribbled on a legal pad. Each line corresponded to a transaction, some minor like inflated gardening bills or suspicious consulting fees, but others were massive. One was a $$15,000 check made out to Sunbeam Innovations, which a quick Google search revealed as a shell company that Karen herself registered the year before. It was supposed to be the contractor for the HOA solar initiative, the same solar panel setup currently powering the camera mounted on my roof without my consent. I laughed, bitter and tired. Karen had taken green energy and turned it into money laundering. The USB held video files too. Several of them showed Karen in her office berating Claire, who was barely audible in the grainy audio. "You're not here to think," Karen snapped in one. "You're here to file what I tell you to file. Do you want to keep your house or not?" That line alone made me sit back in my chair. It wasn't just an abuse of power. It was blackmail. The next morning, I contacted Lila, my attorney, and sent everything over. She called me 20 minutes later, her voice giddy with purpose. "This is not just civil territory anymore, Jason. This is fraud, coercion, illegal seizure of property, misuse of community funds. We're taking this to the state attorney's office." She promised to have filings ready within 24 hours. But I knew Karen wouldn't go down quietly. And sure enough, just before noon, she showed up on my front porch, not in her usual HOA blazer, but in a tailored dress suit, hair straightened, clipboard in hand, and a small local news crew trailing behind her. I stepped outside before she could knock. "Jason," she said, eyes wide with false empathy, "I'm here to extend an olive branch. Better make it a whole tree." She gave a hollow chuckle. "I've come to announce a full resolution. I admit things may have escalated. In the spirit of unity, the HOA board has voted to restore your house and, if you publicly declare peace, we'll drop all complaints against you." "What complaints?" I asked. Karen turned to the camera crew. "We'll handle that in mediation," she said sweetly. Then she faced me again. "Jason, the neighborhood needs stability. Let's not drag this into a circus." I couldn't believe it. She was trying to rewrite history live on camera. I pulled out my phone, flipped to a video clip from the USB, and held it up. "Say hi to your voice, Karen. I've got hours of footage of you threatening and manipulating your own assistant. I've got financial records, fraud, wire misappropriation, and a handy little report from the city about your illegal surveillance rig stealing electricity." She stiffened. "You wouldn't." "I already did." The cameraman blinked, slowly lowered his camera, and mumbled, "Are we still rolling?" Karen pivoted on her heels and stormed off without another word, the news crew scrambling to follow her. She slammed her office door so hard, it rattled the gutter above. I watched from the porch as neighbors peeked from windows, whispering behind hedges. The illusion was cracking. That night, Claire called me. I didn't even know she had my number, but I was grateful. Her voice was shaky, like someone who hadn't trusted a phone in months. "I saw the news clip," she said quietly. "I didn't know if anyone would ever find that lockbox. Thank you. You left everything. It was smart. It's going to bring her down." She hesitated. "Be careful. She's not just dangerous with forms and fines. She knows people. Contractors, ex-board members, city inspectors who owe her favors." I thought of the hastily built fence, the way she fast-tracked the electric reroute without a single permit. She wasn't just abusing power, she was doing it with help. Claire's warning wasn't paranoia. It was history. But I wasn't backing down. The next morning, I marched to the HOA office with a sheriff's deputy and a cease and desist order. We posted it right on the faux marble column outside the door. Karen wasn't there. The place looked deserted. I peeked inside and noticed something strange. The computer was gone. So were the filing cabinet. It was like she'd vanished overnight. Not escaped, just vanished. That's when I realized something wasn't adding up. I rushed back home and pulled up my camera feed again, rewinding to the night before. Around 2 a.m., a truck had pulled up behind the HOA building. 2 people in hoodies had loaded boxes and equipment into the bed. I zoomed in. One of them was definitely Karen. The other looked a lot like her nephew, the one who had skated through my hallway weeks ago. I immediately called Lila and then the police. They took it seriously this time. Between the city inspector's reports, the financial files, and now this possible evidence of tampering with ongoing litigation, the heat was finally on her. The next day brought a bigger shock. An emergency board meeting was called. Not by Karen, but by 3 former HOA members she'd ousted earlier in the year. Apparently, seeing the footage of Karen screaming at Claire and bulldozing fences had reawakened their spine. They voted unanimously to suspend Karen from all duties pending investigation and reinstated the old charter, with the original bylaws. For the first time in a year, the HOA was functioning like a democracy again. They even asked me if I'd like to serve on the board. I told them I'd think about it, after I had my floors professionally sanitized and a new fence built. One that didn't look like it belonged in a compound. But that sense of peace didn't last long. That evening, Mike dropped by with a manila envelope someone had slipped under his door. No return address. Inside were printed screenshots, private texts between me and a few neighbors. Conversations where I vented about Karen, joked about the HOA's cult energy, and even called her a discount dictator. They weren't damning, just embarrassing. And on the final page was a note. Cut from magazine letters like a cliché ransom note. Don't think you won. You just made her mad. I burned the letter. But I didn't sleep that night either. Because deep down I knew this wasn't over. Karen was gone. But she wasn't finished. 3 days after Karen vanished, the power in my house went out. Not the neighborhood. Not the block. Just my house. I was brushing my teeth when the bathroom light flickered once, twice, then died. I poked my head into the hallway, pitch black. The fridge stopped humming. The ceiling fan slowed to a mournful halt. My heart dropped. This wasn't a random outage. I grabbed my flashlight, headed outside, and made my way to the breaker box. Every switch had been thrown into the off position, but not by accident. The screws on the panel were lying in the grass, and the lock had been twisted off. Someone had broken in and shut it down manually. I stood there, holding my breath in the early morning quiet, scanning the bushes, the driveways, the rooftop. Nothing moved. But someone had been here. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing, and exactly where to strike. It wasn't a robbery. Nothing was stolen. This was a message. She was still watching. By noon, the electrician had the power restored and helped me install a tamper-proof box with a secondary lock. Meanwhile, I updated every password, firewall, and security camera angle. The house turned into a digital fortress. If Karen wanted a war of attrition, she'd picked the wrong nerd to mess with. Lila called later with an update. The state had formally opened a case based on our complaint. Claire's statement had been entered into evidence. They were preparing charges not just for property fraud but for theft, misuse of public funds, illegal surveillance, coercion, and a host of zoning violations. Warrants were being drafted. It was finally happening. And yet, the quiet felt wrong. Karen was too arrogant, too theatrical to vanish like that. Even with the law closing in, she'd want her last word. The text messages from burner numbers started next. Vague threats, lines like, "Enjoy your fortress," and "The foundation's always the first to crack." Childish stuff, but it put me on edge. Whoever was helping her, because it was clear she wasn't working alone, was still around. That evening, I checked the footage again. My motion-activated camera at the back of the lot had caught something peculiar. A small figure, someone barely 5 feet tall, sneaking behind the hedges and placing something under my HVAC unit. I raced outside and found it. A bundle of wires rigged to look like a gas line tampering device. It wasn't real. Just a collection of spare parts taped together and stuffed with a Bluetooth speaker that looped a ticking noise. It was a scare tactic, meant to rattle me. And it worked. I filed another report with the police. They took it more seriously now that the warrant was active. An officer named Dahlstrom came by to inspect the device, and as we talked, he muttered, "This kind of harassment's textbook. You corner a narcissist like her, and they'll claw at the walls on their way down." I asked him what the next steps were, legally. He said, "If she sets foot in this neighborhood again, she'll be detained. She knows that. But that won't stop her from sending others." Sure enough, the next morning I caught someone snooping near the back fence. Karen's nephew, the same punk who had been skateboarding in my hallway. I called out from the porch. He bolted like a rabbit. But I didn't chase. Instead, I forwarded the footage to Lila, who added it to our growing mountain of evidence. The real twist came later that week. A real estate agent knocked on my door. She was holding a clipboard and wore a nervous smile. "Hi. I'm here to schedule the pre-sale walkthrough." I blinked. "What sale?" Her smile faltered. This address was listed in a recent foreclosure batch. Claimed to be an HOA forfeiture. I have paperwork that says the property is scheduled for auction next Thursday. I took the packet, flipped through it, and almost laughed, almost. It was an elaborate fake, stamped with a logo from an independent regional HOA authority, which didn't exist, citing fines I never received, and claiming abandonment again. Karen's signature wasn't on it, but the formatting was unmistakably hers. Same phrasing, same cheap ink. She was trying to steal my house. Again. I called the county records office to confirm. No foreclosure, no auction, no proceedings. Then I called a friend of mine who worked in cybersecurity. He traced the document's digital origin to a printer registered in a co-working space 3 towns over. The same place Karen had filed her Sunbeam Innovations shell company. It was the last nail. Armed with this, Lila fast-tracked the lawsuit and submitted everything to the district court. And that's when the hammer finally dropped. At exactly 9:42 a.m. the next Monday, Karen Whitmore was arrested in a Whole Foods parking lot. She was mid-rant over expired goat cheese when 2 plainclothes officers intercepted her beside her Prius. She resisted, tried to claim diplomatic immunity as a registered civic representative of an independent charter, but the cops weren't impressed. They cuffed her in full view of half a dozen shoppers and her local yoga instructor. I watched the arrest video 3 times. It was better than anything on Netflix. The court ordered an asset freeze and a forensic audit of the HOA. Turns out, Karen had funneled over $83,000 of community money into her improvement funds, including purchases for her personal gym, her nephew's college fund, and, hilariously, 2 custom bobbleheads of herself labeled Madam President. The HOA was placed into state receivership. Every homeowner got a restitution check. Claire was offered the opportunity to rebuild the board, and she accepted, under one condition: I had to co-chair it. Reluctantly, I agreed. 2 months later, I hosted a neighborhood cookout, my first real moment of peace since this all began. The new fence was in place, a modest 4-foot wood picket with solar lanterns. No barbed wire. No keypad gate. Just community and ribs on the grill. Mike raised a toast with a root beer and said, "To Jason, the only man in history to fight a one-man war against an HOA president and win." Everyone laughed. Even me. But just as I thought it was over, a little girl pointed toward the street and said, "Why's that lady hiding in the bushes?" We all turned. And there she was. Karen, wearing sunglasses, a baseball cap, and a scarf like she thought she was in disguise. She bolted the moment we saw her, but a group of teens, eager to protect the neighborhood legend, chased her with water balloons and a drone camera. She hasn't been back since. But just to be safe, I installed one final addition to the yard. A wooden sign, carved by hand and posted next to the mailbox. It reads, in bold letters, "Private property. Trespassers will be filmed, memed, and exposed on Reddit." And below that, in smaller font, "Ask me about the bulldozer. Because now, when people walk past my house, they don't see a war zone. They see the house that survived Karen. And more importantly, they know not to mess with the man who bulldozed her fence into suburban history.